What if the devil's mark wasn't a clawed hand or a fiery brand, but a face, royal, crowned, and seated on Europe's most powerful throne? In the 17th century, Spain's King Charles II became that mark. His subjects called him El Hechizado, the Bewitched. They whispered that no man could look as he did without sorcery, that his very existence was proof of a curse that had seeped into the bones of his bloodline. But the truth was darker than superstition. Charles was not the victim of demons from the outside. He was the victim of demons bred from within. For over 200 years, the Habsburg dynasty had practiced what they called purity of blood. Cousins married cousins. Uncles married nieces. The same faces appeared again and again on the family tree until the branches curled inward like a dying vine. What they called purity was really entrapment, a genetic prison where escape was impossible. Every generation carried the weight of the last. Every marriage narrowed the bloodline further, until all its flaws converged into one doomed heir. That heir was Charles. His father was also his mother's uncle. His grandparents, on both sides, were themselves uncle and niece. By the time of his birth in 1661, Charles's DNA resembled that of someone trapped for centuries on an isolated island, with no strangers to bring new strength into the line. Spain didn't get a child, it got the final experiment of 2 centuries of inbreeding. The court tried to celebrate him. Bells rang in Madrid, nobles toasted to his health, and priests declared his arrival a blessing from heaven. But even as an infant, his body betrayed the truth. His jaw hung open, unable to close. His limbs were weak. His head, disturbingly large. Nurses whispered that the boy looked less like a king and more like a broken doll. His mother, Mariana of Austria, turned to prayer, begging God to heal what human decisions had destroyed. But the Habsburgs had no intention of stopping. They had gambled everything on the idea that keeping power meant keeping blood sealed. It was power before love, power before life itself. And now, Spain's throne belonged to a child whose very existence was proof that power without limits eventually devours its own masters. Charles II was not born cursed by witches. He was cursed by centuries of arrogance disguised as tradition. And as he grew, every year of his life would become living evidence of how far a dynasty could push its luck before fate finally demanded payment in flesh. By the time Charles II reached adulthood, his very body had become a spectacle of horror. Imagine the ruler of the world's largest empire entering a room and instead of commanding awe, commanding pity, or worse, disgust. The Habsburg jaw jutted forward so grotesquely that his lips could never meet. His mouth hung open like a broken hinge, saliva dripping constantly, his words reduced to muffled wet sounds that even his closest advisors struggled to understand. Every royal decree was a riddle, not of politics, but of biology. Eating, that simplest of human acts, became humiliation performed in public. Court kitchens were forced to grind his meals into mush, soups and pastes that still leaked from the corners of his mouth. Servants hovered with cloths, dabbing the royal chin as if he were an infant. At banquets meant to display majesty, foreign ambassadors sat in silence, watching their mighty host struggle to chew, watching food spill down his gown. Power was supposed to inspire respect. But Charles inspired something far more dangerous: doubt. His deformities didn't end with his jaw. His body was twisted in ways that made him appear almost unnatural. He barely reached 5 feet in height. His head was disproportionately large, bobbing on a thin neck that seemed too weak to support it. His torso hunched forward, his back curved like a question mark. His limbs were spindly, his gait a stumbling shuffle. He did not walk into a room. He lurched, clinging to walls and furniture as if gravity itself was plotting against him. And while his body failed him, so did his mind. Charles did not learn to walk until the age of 8. He did not read until 10. His tutors described teaching him as pouring water into a cracked vessel. Knowledge went in, but nothing stayed. He threw tantrums with the rage of a child denied a toy, then sat motionless for hours, staring at nothing, as though the world had already abandoned him. His courtiers whispered not of strategy or statesmanship, but of whether their king had the mind of a child trapped in a man's failing body. Even his hair seemed to betray him. Thin, brittle, falling out in patches, it left his scalp resembling diseased hide more than a royal crown. Court painters softened the reality, but not even art could hide what Charles truly was: the embodiment of a dynasty collapsing under the weight of its own pride. Charles was not just a king. He was a living warning. Every time his people saw him, every time they heard his garbled speech or watched his trembling steps, they saw what centuries of Habsburg ambition had wrought. His body was not his own, it was the mirror in which an empire saw its decay. In the 17th century, a king had one sacred duty: to continue the dynasty. Wars could be lost, fortunes squandered, but as long as an heir was born, the bloodline endured. For Charles II of Spain, even this most basic task was impossible. The empire that stretched across oceans was held hostage by a man who could not produce a single child. Charles married twice. His first bride, Marie-Louise of Orleans, entered Spain as a radiant young princess, expecting to marry a king. What she found was something closer to a patient, frail, deformed, and bewildered by the very idea of a wedding night. The bedchamber, where dynasties were supposed to be secured, became a scene of tears and humiliation. Marie-Louise was blamed, accused of barrenness. She was forced to endure invasive treatments, potions of bitter herbs, rituals designed to awaken fertility, humiliating examinations by court physicians. But the truth was not hers to confess. It was Charles's. His body had never matured. His reproductive organs were described as childlike, his impotence absolute. Still, the court clung to denial. They whispered that miracles might happen. They prayed, they poisoned Marie-Louise with endless fertility potions, they punished her with blame. By 26, she was dead. Some said of appendicitis, others whispered it was despair, or even quiet poison. The dynasty wasted no time. Charles was married again, this time to Maria Anna of Neuburg, who arrived with the weight of Europe's hopes on her shoulders. She, too, soon realized the truth. Spain's king could not father a child. The irony was cruel. For centuries, the Habsburgs had twisted their family tree in knots to keep power in their blood. Now, their final heir could not pass that blood to anyone. The empire's greatest strength, its obsessive grip on lineage, had become its greatest weakness. Outside the palace, rival powers sharpened their knives. France, Austria, England, all knew the Spanish throne would fall vacant, and all prepared to claim it. Diplomats smiled in public but plotted in private, drafting treaties, forging alliances, building armies. Everyone was waiting for Charles to die. Inside the palace, desperation curdled into superstition. Advisors whispered that witchcraft had rendered him sterile. Priests suggested demonic possession. If medicine could not create an heir, perhaps prayer or exorcism might. Charles, humiliated and confused, endured it all, his private agony transformed into a public crisis. He was not just a man unable to have children. He was the walking symbol of a dynasty's end. And as his body weakened, Europe braced for the chaos that his childless death would unleash. When medicine failed to explain Charles II, Spain turned to the supernatural. In the royal palace, priests staged exorcisms not in secrecy, but as public theater. Foreign dignitaries and noblemen stood in gilded halls as their king writhed on the floor, holy water splashed across his contorted body, crucifixes pressed into his skin until he screamed. Priests shouted that demons were clawing their way out of him. Charles vomited, convulsed, fainted, while the court watched, horrified, yet unable to look away. The king himself believed it. His mind, fragile and suggestible, accepted the priest's words, that evil spirits lived inside him, that his suffering was proof of sorcery. And when the pain briefly eased, he begged for more. More rituals. More prayers. More torment disguised as salvation. In 1699, one priest even claimed to have expelled 47 demons from the king's body, each with its own name. Charles collapsed, silent for 3 days, his body broken by the very rituals meant to save him. But no prayer, no relic, no spell could stop the truth. His body was dying. His hair fell in clumps. His skin grew sallow. His mind wandered into delirium. At only 38 years old, Charles II, the last of Spain's great Habsburg kings, drew his final breath in 1700. Then came the moment of revelation. His autopsy. Royal physicians opened the body, and what they found was so horrifying that the first report was suppressed. His heart, black and shriveled, was no larger than a walnut. His lungs were rotting, filled with fluid and decay. His intestines were gangrenous, his reproductive organs stunted, malformed. And in his skull, instead of a healthy brain, they found water. So much fluid surrounding gray, damaged tissue that doctors marveled he had been able to think at all. One physician concluded with a sentence that chilled Europe: "This body contained not a single sound organ." It should have ended the superstitions. It should have proven that his curse was human, not demonic. But instead, the grotesque findings only deepened the myth. How could a man so broken have survived nearly 4 decades? For many, the autopsy became proof that the devil had indeed touched Spain's throne. Charles's death did not bring peace. It brought war. With no heir, the War of Spanish Succession erupted, dragging Europe into over a decade of bloodshed. The dynasty that had once ruled the world had destroyed itself, not by invasion or rebellion, but by its own obsession with purity. Charles II was not just the last Habsburg king of Spain. He was their reckoning. His life was the warning history carved into flesh. That power, when pursued without restraint, eventually consumes the very body meant to wield it.